So we are recording the event, and we, as I said before, you can leave your questions, your comments in the chat, and I'll get to them after I ask some of my questions. So, and I ask people who are online now to mute yourselves so there is no distracting noise. And I'll begin just with a basic question with Natasha. Where did you grow up in New York? What was it like growing up there? What kind of educational opportunities were available to you?
So I grew up in Flushing, New York, between Flushing and Brooklyn. My stepfather was from Brooklyn, or is from Brooklyn, and my mom is from Queens. I had fairly well educational opportunities because we lived in a predominantly white area. My mom basically, you know, was able to financially care for us where we were not, you know, really affected by poverty. However, my mom and my dad were teenagers when I was born. So emotionally and guidance wise, I was like left to fend for self. My stepfather basically raised me from the age of 2. I didn't meet my real father until I was 9 years old. And it was just really difficult. My mom was emotionally empty. She was a child. So a lot of my years where I should have been in school, I was basically running the streets, hanging out with gangs. I had a boyfriend at 13. I basically lived with him. So I had the opportunities, but I really didn't take them because I didn't have the guidance or the emotional support of, you know, how to raise a young lady.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like because of a family situation, it was really difficult for you to be engaged in school. Is that right?
Yeah, I was very angry. So I was always a fighter. By the 2nd grade, I was sent to what they call a 600 school, where you would send children that had behavioral problems. All my classes were mainstream because I was extremely smart, but I fought every day. I was always in trouble, and it did nothing. It didn't help. It actually pushed my mom even further away, and nobody wanted to deal with me. My stepfather and his family did the best. I hate the word stepfather because he's my dad. Excuse me for that. But they were very supportive of me, but there's only so much you can do with somebody else's child. It was a constant battle between my mom and my grandfather and everybody trying to tell her what to do, or her feeling like they were telling her what to do, and really they were trying to help. And it put a wedge in our relationship from an early age, not to count that I was the only child for 7 years. So by the time she did kind of figure out how raising kids did, she was having another kid. So that just made me even angrier. And it made it really hard to pull me out of that already angry, acting out aura that I had.
So looking back now as an adult, do you think anything could have been done differently to help you during those difficult years, either by school authorities or by some other outside people? Just wondering.
Yeah, I do think there could have been some form of intervention due at the time, and sometimes I do wish there was. But if I hadn't gone through what I went through, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. And the struggle that I had, although is real and very intense, that struggle will save somebody else.
Okay. So you were incarcerated at the age of 15. So
actually 13.
13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So could you just share some of the circumstances of that arrest and conviction?
So by the age of 10, the school had gotten involved and I became PINS. and they had took me out of my mom's home and put me into a group home. The problem with that is she would come get me. So basically, we were running away together. But by the age of 13, I was just like all over the place. So my friends used to steal cars. So it started there. We were stealing cars and ended up in a really bad accident when I drove through the police barricade. The family court sentenced me to juvenile justice for a series of between 6 and 18 months, which had I behaved would have sent me home at 15, but I did not. Fighting kept getting me extended for 6 months. Around the age of 16, I went home with an interstate compact. By then, my mom had moved to Pennsylvania. So they gave me an interstate compact and sent me to Pennsylvania. I was home maybe 2 months before I was rearrested and sent back to New York, where now I'm 16, I was sent to Rikers Island.
Wow. And were you given any kind of emotional help, given you had all these, emotional issues?
No, that I was labeled having intermittent explosive disorder. So therapy really doesn't work for me. It kind of makes me angry. The diagnosis I have is basically what you could call a way of protecting myself. Because with those experiences in the department, the Division for Youth, a lot of bad things happen to kids in jail. Even one of the places I was at ended up on the news because they would restrain us physically. You'll have a whole man like basically sitting on top of a 13-year-old, forcing a rag into my mouth so that I didn't scream. So all of that became, added on to the traumas and the unwantedness that I already felt being a child of a teenage mom who was basically emotionally an empty shell. So no, I didn't have anybody to work with on how I felt or to explain to me how I felt. And by the time I was at that age, I didn't really care. It was whatever you said I was supposed to do, I wasn't going to do it. This is what I wanted to do. Nobody cared about me. This is what I'm going to do.
So what advice would you give to someone who is in a similar situation as a teenager today? If you had to work in that situation, what do you think there was any way of helping people such as yourself at that difficult time?
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that all my qualities were bad. I was always very smart, even very athletic as a kid, and I've been fearless all my life. So talking to me was very easy. I would tell my younger self, use your words, and not only use your words, listen to what they're saying back. Somebody does care. And I would also tell my younger self that the worse you act, the worse it gets. Like, we become rebellious as children because we want to pay everybody else back. When in the long run, I'm the one that suffered the most. Because at the end of the day, if I thought my mother didn't care when I was a young child, when I was a teenager, she definitely didn't care. So it affected me, not her. It didn't stop her progress. It didn't stop her career. It didn't stop her from moving across the world. It didn't stop any of those things. It stopped me from growth. It stopped me from living the life I could have had. Yeah. Everybody strives to go to college when they're young. I went to college, but it was in prison.
Yeah.
So I made my situation worse. I would definitely tell somebody in my situation that there are people out there that will help you and that do care. You just have to sit still enough to find them and find God. He'll tell you where they're at.
Yeah. Well, that's good wisdom. And I'm sure it's, for a teenager, not the easiest thing to accept, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned in the biographical information you've given us that you were in solitary for 4 years. So what led you to be placed in solitary? What impact did it have on you?
Okay, so I went to adult prison. By the age of 24, I was addicted to drugs. Had a crack addiction, and so I went to jail. I was never out of jail more than 30 days. Even in between 4 to 15 years. So I did 4 years, 4 years, 4 years, and in between a year here in the city jail, a year there, a violation of parole. But the first time I went was in the state penitentiary. My husband was in prison as well. And because of his gang status, they put me in solitary confinement. He was in solitary confinement as well. And we definitely were not in the same prison. But because he was a quote unquote high gang, a ranking gang member, they automatically put me in solitary straight off the bus from Rikers Island. I was in solitary confinement for 19 days when I finally got a visit from the warden. And I asked her, why did you put me here? I didn't do anything. Like, this is my first time in prison. Yeah. I'm 24 years old. I don't know nothing about adult jail. And you have me locked in a cell for 19 days where I don't see outside at all. Not counting the fact that I have no family support. So nobody's calling, nobody's visiting, nobody's doing any of that. She told me that I was a threat to her prison, to the safety of her prison, and that as long as I was in her jail, I would stay in this cell. And I stayed there for 4 years until I was released. Wow. To another jail. How it affected me, the things I've seen, the things I've heard. I was at one time I was in a cell next to a girl who hung herself. She had found out she was pregnant. She was sleeping with a lieutenant it's a staff, high-ranking staff member, and she got pregnant. They put her, when her pregnancy test came back positive, they put her in solitary so nobody could see her. They claim she hung herself, but I heard all the commotion. She was in the cell next door to me. And definitely the night before that, there was more than one person in that cell. There's another girl I was in solitary confinement with. She was put in the cell next to me because an officer heard somebody threaten her. She was pregnant. She ended up giving birth to her twins 3 months early. Her daughter was actually born in the cell and lived only 26 minutes. So besides the regular screaming and kicking that goes on 24 hours a day, if there's 10 of us in solitary confinement, 5 of us are kicking the door during the day, and when they finally get tired and go to sleep, the other 5 start. The verbal abuse, the lack of letting you do anything as simple as taking a shower every day, it is so disturbing where you start to feel like you're never gonna see the light of day again. I've never been the type to be willing to hurt myself, but I also did myself a disservice because if you opened that door, we were gonna get it on. But I have been in the clinic with somebody who mutilated themselves just to get to the clinic. It was traumatic. It was traumatic. It was gloomy, always gloomy. You always smelled the smell of feces because people would be losing their mind in there to the extent where there was a girl that smeared her feces on the walls of her cell. So the whole pier smelled like feces. It is just something I don't wish on anybody. Not for one day, definitely not for 4 years.
Well, that sounds, and I assume there was no attempt to provide any services to you, I assume.
Absolutely not. I had no services at all. And that is because I couldn't even get religious services because they sent me there straight from the bus. Yeah. So the bus pulls up and you do an intake for the next week, where you do certain classes and you fill out certain paperwork. I was skipped for all of that. So I was labeled as being non-religious. So therefore, I couldn't get any visits from any religious faculty because they didn't know what religion I was. And they weren't, you can't just change your religion in prison. So I can write a form that said I wanted to go to church. And because it doesn't say that I'm Christian, I would not be allowed to go to church. Even if I was not in solitary confinement, until my religion was changed and approved by staff, I wouldn't have been able to go to a religious service.
Well, and all, this was in Pennsylvania, or this was in New York
New
State?
York. Mm-hmm.
That's-
Bedford Hills Correctional.
Yeah.
Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, which is already a gloomy place.
Mhm.
Already gloomy. As soon as you get on those grounds, there's a dark cloud over it.
Now, you said your husband was in solitary too. What impact did it have on him and on you?
So what I noticed about my husband when he came home, because he was in solitary for 12 years, but he was in jail a total of 18. So when he came home, I noticed that he was really like, he couldn't take anything that was, nothing spontaneous could happen to him. So if he didn't plan, if he was leaving for work and the A train was not running and he had to go to another train station, it was the end of the world. So even minor things like normal disagreements in the home. Oh, I want to watch this show. Well, go watch TV in the room. Will turn into an all-out war. So at work, he had gotten injured. He was working at the one of the piers downtown Manhattan, and his vehicle had tipped over. He had got thrown out the vehicle and it tipped over on top of him and crushed his pelvis. He was in a wheelchair for like 2 months. And while he was in that wheelchair, I noticed that it was like he was in prison all over again. He was hostile. He was disrespectful, angry, straight out mean. And one day we got into an verbal altercation, and I went to leave. And the next thing I know, he had a gun out. His sister was present at the time, and she was screaming, "Put the gun down." So the neighbors ended up calling the police, but I left my house that next day and never came back. It changed my life. It's really hard when you grow up feeling like you don't have anyone, and then the person you do have becomes somebody you don't know. Yeah, by the grace of God, like I have a good relationship with both my father's sides of the family and my dad. But as far as like, you never get over that neediness of support from a mom or love from a spouse. But that's what really got me clicked to me, that solitary confinement did this.
Yeah.
And it also affects me in a way where, although I don't like to be alone, I really don't like to be around a lot of people. There's days I'm in my house going through whatever I'm going through because I live alone. And I'm okay with it. Like, this is just my space. Sometimes after we have like regular meetings, for instance, we had our first members meeting with, some of the people from the community, and they shared their stories. The next day, I didn't talk to anybody. Sometimes I do one-on-one interviews with the ladies that now have loved ones. And once I do their story, I cannot be bothered by anything the next day. Whatever I do that day, as far as even work is concerned, I do it alone. Those are mostly the times that I take to drive around the city and post flyers, but I don't want to talk to anybody. So that's how solitary has affected me. I'm still very sensitive, very needy, even to the point where if you speak to me in a certain tone or brush me off, it's like the end of the world. I've learned how to try to, not take other people's personalities personal, because I still don't know my own.
Mm.
Sometimes I have a bad day for absolutely no reason at all, because just 3 years ago I was homeless and jobless, with
Yeah.
no with no path at all in sight, because I just got out of prison. I was
Yeah.
just learning how to be free.
Here's a question from one of our listeners. During your time in solitary, what items did you have in the cell with you?
So in my cell, I had a change of greens, a white shirt, nothing personal. First of all, I didn't get packages and stuff like that. Like I said, I didn't have the support of outside sources. I had books, but they would get passed around from the girls that are already in solitary. But other than that, I didn't have anything. I had, of course, my linen, and that's it. A change of clothes to wear if I had to go to a medical appointment, and a white shirt in the event that I did have a visit. But I never wore it because I never had one.
Yeah. And how often did you get out of the cell?
So they basically would give us showers maybe 3 times a week. And rec in New York, sometimes every once in a while we would miss a rec session. Like there would be days we didn't go. But for the most part, we got an hour out at least every day.
Uh-huh.
And you would go right out of your cell into a cage.
Yeah.
So there was a cage connected to everybody's cell. They just open the back of the cell door and you go out there.
I see. Huh. So just to continue this discussion about solitary, prison authorities have said, and I've heard this, that the deployment of solitary is essential to maintaining security in the prison. What would your response be to this claim, and how important is the elimination or limitation of solitary to fundamental reform of the system?
Okay, so first of all, solitary confinement doesn't make any prison safer, because what you don't realize is the people that you have in solitary confinement usually get out. And when they get out, now they have all of these mental instabilities, these irrational thoughts, and they're angry. So that didn't make it any better, number one. Number two, 1 out of every 4 people that are sent to solitary are sent for something violent. So if the other 3 people are sent for drug use, which is the major one, and you've put them in solitary with no services, no addiction services, what did you do? What did you heal? What did you fix? You didn't address any of the underlying issues, and now they'll get out of solitary confinement with more issues. The issues that they've collected while being locked in a dark box the size of a parking space, being fed food that you can identify with no human interaction. So now they've developed other problems. What I think should happen is that people should treat people like people, no matter where they are. They should stop using incarceration as a form of torture, because sooner or later, people come home and now you have sentence their family members and their neighbors to the craziness that has gone on in their head. I speak just this morning on my family prayer line, which we have every morning. My uncle, Mr. Pledger right here, is a bishop, and we have a family prayer line at 8 a.m. And I said to them that even with my dad was incarcerated for 22 years. His crazy and my crazy do not mix. So when I visit him, I break out in hives. But he is seriously mentally damaged because of the long-term solitary confinement that he had. I want to make something clear. I don't fight to end solitary because of my experience. Personally, I fight because I know what will happen to a loved one when their loved one has experienced this type of torture. I truly pray and will continue to fight to get some resolution in what Department of Corrections is really supposed to be doing. It is supposed to rehabilitate and correct the behaviors that put you at risk. But doing that does not only mean locking somebody up. They need treatment. Um, yeah, it's way deeper than just you committed a crime, you're sentenced to this time, and we're gonna do it with you what we please, because that's exactly what happens. You know, it's a never ending Ferris wheel. And what I do notice is they changed the verbal gymnastics that they practice by changing the name every year. It's still the same practice of torture. So if you are supposed to be the one in the right and the person that committed the crime is the one in the wrong, how does that work? Because you're now committing a crime too by treating people inhumanely. That is a crime. It is a crime against life. It is a crime against moral standards.
Well said, very well said. So you think prison should just be about rehabilitation and healing, is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But first, like I said, the prison system is something that has to be dismantled as well. But we got to start somewhere. At least for the people that are already there, we can try to protect them from being harmed even more than they're already harmed. I know as a woman, the majority of women go to prison for either drug abuse or some form of domestic abuse. Where's the healing for that? Poverty is a major reason people go to prison. Most people do not wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm gonna go out and commit a crime today. It's normally a need. If somebody starts selling narcotics at a young age, it's most likely because his parents can't feed him. So society has to do its job in fixing that while we dismantle what goes on in the Department of Corrections, because that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to dismantle that.
So let's talk a little bit about addiction and mental illness, since you said you yourself were addicted to drugs at
Absolutely.
some time. And so how should that be handled in our society in a way that it isn't being done now?
Well, by the grace of God, they finally have realized that addiction is a disease. It should not be criminalized. I've myself was sentenced to prison when I was arrested with a drug dealer who was sentenced to a program. He's not the one that needs the program. I do. So if the system stops working, surrounding all of its energy around money and what you can afford, then maybe more treatment will come of, instead of locking up the person that's on drugs, get them into a program, get them the support that they need. What people don't realize is when you use drugs, it gives your body a chemical imbalance. So, not always does speeches work. This person might now have a problem with their nerves after smoking so much cocaine that it's rattled their brain. You know what I'm saying? Target who's bringing it in here, because none of us grow cocoa seeds. None of us grow cocaine in our backyards. You can't find a farm in the United States that has a cocoa leaf on it. Let's start where it really comes from. Mental illness, the way they handle mental illness. Mental illness is criminalized so badly that there's been times where they've shut down all of the mental health facilities, and now somebody is having a manic episode outside and the cops are coming to get them and arresting them and bringing them to prison. Like, so what is prison going to do to them? It exasperates the condition. It exasperates the condition of being psychic and being paranoid. And so now you're going to bring this paranoid individual that's having a meltdown into a cell with 10 other people who don't know how to deal with them as well. The officers laugh at you. I've seen people have manic episodes and the officers laugh at the person talking to themselves. Like, where do they do that at? Yeah. Where's the compassion for the confusion that this person feels? And how do you expect somebody that has been locked up for decades to be able to handle the frustration of somebody next to them or sleeping next to them that's having a manic breakdown. How do you expect that to work? This person is traumatized as well from being in an unsafe environment. Prison is an unsafe and traumatic experience for everybody.
So were there any mental health services when
Yeah,
you were in Bedford and other places?
Of course, they medicate them. That's what they do. They medicate you. You go see the therapist, or you go see a psychiatrist once a month. They see what medications are working from you. They have a unit just for it's called a MICA unit, medically and chemically addicted. And everybody is moving like snails because they're over medicated and deprived of therapeutic healing, organic healing.
Well, sometimes, sometimes medication is helpful, but you're saying it was exclusive use.
It's extensive. Right? So the medication is not used to heal. The medication is used to control. Uh-huh. I mean, how hard is it to control somebody walking, sluggish? How hard is it to control them?
Right. What about sentencing and the length of sentences in your experience? Did you think that whatever you thought about the conditions of your imprisonment, was the sentence that you were given, was that reasonable in your mind, or for the offense you did?
I think it was excessive, not as excessive as most people, because my problem was drugs. So there were some instances where I shouldn't have never went to jail at all. But like I said, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but I've been arrested 26 times. Never. And I've been arrested with drug paraphernalia, drugs, inside the drug den, in the car with the drug dealer, with paraphernalia in my purse. Never offered a drug program. Never. I applied for a drug program and they told me that I didn't fit the criteria because I had a violent history from the age of 16. I was now in my 20s with a whole different problem and that you don't want to address. So if you say, did I think my sentence was excessive? Yes, because it didn't fit the crime. Here I am, a whole drug addict, and you're sending me to prison.
Yeah. And what was the conviction exactly for, actually?
My first conviction was for possession with the intent to sell. I was caught in a vehicle with my drug dealer, and he had put his drugs under my seat. When the police searched the car, the drugs were under my seat. However, in my purse, I had a crack pipe, and in his pocket, he had $10,000. You figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, the police are supposed to be the ones that this is their job.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, I knew that if I told on him, nobody would help me. And I also knew that he had enough money to pay somebody to fight his battle for him, which he did. I can admit that when we first got arrested, he did have somebody send me $2,000, and I held on to that $2,000 for dear life because I knew I wasn't going to get not another coin. But I ended up with a 2 to 4, and I did the whole 4 years.
And was basically for possession?
He did a program.
But
he got a program.
But was it were you basically accused of possession or for dealing?
Possession with the intent to sell. So there's a possession charge where you have drugs that are in one bag and you can claim them for personal use. And then if you're caught with drugs that are bagged separately, where it looks like you're trying to sell, that's where the intent comes from.
I see. Yeah. So you were basically convicted for being addicted to drugs. Yeah.
You're right.
Right. Yeah.
The insanity is when the police pulled up behind us, we were in a very compromising predicament, which anybody would have seen, would have realized that, something isn't right here. She's in this car with him for a reason.
Yeah,
And they didn't look at it at all like that. They didn't care as long as they got a conviction.
right.
And they never helped me. Every time I was released from prison, my 15 years, I want to clarify, was not done at one time. I did 4, 4, and 4, and numerous violations, which adds up to way more than 15 years. But to keep it simple, that's what it is. Every time I was released from prison, I was released to a shelter. Never was I released to reentry until this last time. And I wasn't even released to reentry this last time. I was released to a shelter, and because I did an employment program through a reentry program, they took me in.
So
From
you're
the
saying,
shelters.
when you say a shelter, you mean a homeless shelter? Is that what you mean?
Yes, homeless shelter. Yes, once again, with drug mixed, that is a combination of drug addicts and people that are mentally ill.
Right, right. Wow.
So from one
So-
traumatic place to another.
Yeah. So
With-
there were hardly any, if any at all, services for you
Absolutely not.
prior to your release, that is to help you
None.
integrate into the community.
When I don't know about being released from Virginia, but when they release you from New York State prison, you're giving $40, which they accumulate from you during your time taking $1 out of your pay every week or whatever. You're released with that $40 and a bus ticket. If you have an address or family that is willing to take you in, you'll possibly be paroled there. If not, you're paroled to the homeless shelter that is in the area from which you came. I come from New York City. I was paroled to the New York City shelter system. That is in the most insane, it's worse than jail, actually, because it's more unsafe. These are people that go outside every day. You don't know what they're bringing back in.
Wow. So that I have experience both in Virginia and Maryland, similar ways of people just being dumped on the street with very few resources, to say the least. I have a friend who was in the Maryland system for 20 some years. He was arrested when he was 17 and he was released when he was about 40. So he didn't know anybody else outside. He didn't have relations with his family, and they gave him some money and put him on the street.
That's exactly what they do.
It's just,
My brother is currently in
just
prison in
amazing,
Maryland.
which was just amazing. So there was no halfway house program in New York State. That's what you're saying.
There is, but what I'm saying is the
Okay.
services that are available to women are very small.
Uh-huh.
Most of the places that you will come across cater to men, including the prison and the programs in the prison.
Yeah.
So I was released to the shelter, and then I went to Fortune Society to do an internship. My internship was done as a job developer, where I learned how to basically write resumes, get people interview ready, and connect with companies that hired felony friendly people that were felony friendly. And while doing that, I ran one of my friends that I was locked up with. She was in a program called Fortune Society. Well, the same program, but a different aspect of it. There's the castle and then there's Fortune. She was in the castle. The shelter that I was in at the time, my roommate was severely schizophrenic. And one night she flipped out and threw nail polish remover on the other roommate while she slept and set her on fire. I left that night and said I would never go back there because I knew I would go to jail.
Yeah.
And I called my friend and she told me to come to the castle. I stayed in the kitchen area, the cafeteria area, until the next morning, and then they gave me a bed there.
I see.
But that was how I ended up in living in the castle, which gave me a chance, to really focus on changing my life around, because if you don't have stable housing, you don't have anything. So it kind of worked in my favor because that same friend that got me into the castle was a canvasser for Just Leadership. And that's how I ended up. One day they came and got me from lunch, like, I told you that I was always fearless. So one day they came and got me and said, Mayor de Blasio is on 125th Street. Are you scared to talk to him? And I was like, me? Scared? They like, you got lunch? I'm like, yeah. They like, come downstairs. So I go downstairs. We head up 125th Street. They was like, go ask him. And then when I finally see him, I'm like, I've been on drugs for like 18 years in and out of prison. I don't know no elected officials. This man is like 7 feet tall. And he has this whole crowd around him. So I go and I walk up to him and he was like, hello. And I was like, hi, my name is Natasha. Are you going to close Rikers Island? And he must have, he had to bend down to actually hold my hand. He must have felt like the aggression coming off of me. He was rubbing my hand and we talked the whole time. Nobody else got a chance to speak to him. And from that day on, it was like, oh, you got to come work with us. And that's where it started.
So that was one of the questions here from one of our from the audience was how did you manage to turn your life around so dramatically? So so having that connection with the castle was really the beginning of the pathway out for you.
Yeah, not only that, when I first came home from prison, it was in January. So it was January of 2016. Valentine's Day, one of my friends was like, Tasha, you want to go to church with me? My husband was still locked up. So basically I was like kind of what you would call single. When you've been separated from somebody so long, he'd been in prison for 18 years. What kind of relationship do we really have? I was like, sure. She was like, Valentine's Day is the day that there are the most highest rate of suicides from single people, suicide attempts. So I went to church with her and I got saved that day. And after that day, it was like every step I took was calculated. Yeah, of course, I've had numerous issues, but the day that I got saved, I actually turned my life all the way around.
Well, we have about 15-20 minutes left. I do welcome questions from our audience. I see Britt has her. Britt, I'm not sure if Britt is male or female, but
that's my uncle.
Oh, that's your uncle. Britt, if you could, if you want to ask your question orally, that's fine. If you want to unmute yourself.
I have a question. The last portion that you just indicated, I think is very imperative to be addressed, because I think being in solitary confinement so much, you have to have a spiritual outlet to help grow you, to know that there's an ultimate love for you, which is God. And so how were you able to develop your relationship with God going through the storms? Well, we talk about this all the time. So I'm asking a question I've always talked about because I'm very spiritual. How is it possible that your relationship with God got so strong in the midst of the storm?
I went through, so this interview touches on a small piece of my trauma. I always joke that I have 2 guardian angels. They take turns. And but what I've been through in my life from childhood until yesterday has been so chaotic that if there was no God, I would have never made it. Oh God, I'm gonna cry. The feelingness of being alone, the feeling of being unwanted, to the point where people would meet me and say, "You're so pretty," and I'd be like, "Who?" I knew God had my back. And that's how I got through. I have been raped. I've prostituted. I've been homeless. But today I am disease, drug, and drama free. And if there was no God, that would not be. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah.
It is imperative that people know that there is something out there to help you. Because the feeling of being alone is the worst feeling in the world. And I think that when you don't know that there is a God, and you don't know God for whatever you know him for, then you have no help, no hope. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how much power you have. If you don't have a relationship with God, you don't have nothing.
No. Very strong message. Really appreciate that. I know our audience, you may want to look at the chat. A number of people have
Can't see.
put some comments in. So impressed with your words and choosing to be so vulnerable with us as well. It's just quite beautiful to watch and to be part of.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your messages.
Yeah. Are there more questions or comments from the audience?
Thank you, Auntie. Thank you, Miss Lily. Thank you, Shante.
Well, since nobody else has anything to say,
I think everybody's processing right now.
Let me just say this as an uncle for a niece who has been incarcerated multiple times and the impact it has made on her life as well as ours, even feeling absence during her storm because we were going through our own storms. I'm a recovering addict and now I'm a bishop. She's a recovering addict and now she's a phenomenal coalition solitary confinement leader in the community. Her father has done many of years, but in all of that, what we've always had was the love of God. And that's what brought us through as a family. I'm speaking on a family background because as she said before, it affects everyone. It has not only affected her, it affected us. And even times that her and I in conversation sometimes, I'll be like, okay, bring it down, so bring it down. Because she gets excited and very defensive when things are said, because that's all she knows to protect herself. And I think that solitary confinement has caused a schism in your mind, a division in your mind that makes you always have, I gotta do what is most important for me, because if I don't protect me, who will? And Natasha has really, and I am very proud of my niece, by the way.
Thank you.
She is a phenomenal woman and she really loves what she's doing. It's in her heart to do it. You know, like preaching is in my heart. You know, speaking out for people in solitary confinement is in her heart. I've seen her work in New York State, and now she's in Virginia. And I want to tell Virginia, you guys are blessed to have Natasha there because she's going to fight for the rights. And she's had bills passed and all that in these last few years that she's been. I mean, it's been a little bit of time compared to all the time that she's been incarcerated.
Right.
And she's been more productive not being incarcerated. So incarceration, you didn't defeat her, she defeated you. And as she knows, and I always tell her that if God be for you, who could be against you? No weapons formed against you shall prosper. And I think that the spiritual aspect is really needed, especially for those in solitary confinement, because they need to know that they're loved. Yeah, somebody said walking testimony, so true.
Yeah, say amen to that for sure. And I guess
Amen.
For me, one of the moving parts of this interview is one of the things that I believe in so strongly is that we're all created in the image of God, and that means that we all have the power to change. And we're not destined for a particular fate, and that we can take control of our lives. And I guess, Natasha, you're such eloquent testimony to that. People can change and can really recreate themselves. And you certainly have done that so beautifully.
Thank you. looks like my Aunt Denise has something to say. You want to say something? Your hands raised, Aunt Denise?
I sure do. Natasha, she spoke about having a stepfather, and then she said, no, she don't like that. The stepfather she's speaking about is my brother, Kevin Evans, and Natasha is my niece. I am truly, truly proud of her. I ask for your forgiveness in times that I was not there for you as an aunt. I am shamed by your testimony when you was lost and I was not there for you to hold you up, to speak life into you. But today I see the manifestation of what God is doing in you abundantly above all that you could ever think or ask. Continue to be steadfast in God. Continue to be a testimony, for you are a living epistle of what the word of God can do in and through you. I love you. Continue to praise God, and God will always be there for you. You are a blessing to those that you meet.
Thank you, Aunt Denise. You've always told me to wait for the miracle. Well, I waited, so let's get it.
Get it?
I don't want to be sensitive anymore. So I want to talk about what our next move is. So the next move is to shut down this torturous practice that Virginia Department of Corrections has going on, that they try to pull the wool over our eyes and like we don't know what's happening. I am adamant in getting the next bill that we introduce passed. I need all of y'all's support. I will be reaching out to every ministry I can find, family members, and don't think because you're not in Virginia, you cannot help us. It's as easy as reposting a post, calling a legislator, writing an op-ed, passing some information along. But everybody needs their hands in the fight for humanity, because this is not a prison issue, it is a people issue. We should treat people the way they deserve to be treated, like human beings. Love your brother like you love yourself. Want for your sister what you want for yourself. Our country is as strong as the way we treat our weakest people.
Okay, thanks for that. I think we got our marching orders.
Look at me still working.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We got our marching orders that we need to do in Virginia, and hopefully we'll do the same in Maryland and in the district and the Federal Bureau of Prisons, all along.
Yes.
But let's hope we'll get going with Virginia. Any final comments or questions? If not, we'll close it up, but any last chance?
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Last chance. Natasha, our cousin, I call him Reverend Ra. He's been putting up a post.
Oh yeah, I didn't know who that was. Thank you, Ra.
So, but I want to say this before you close. Natasha, you know that I'm an advocate for the people of God. And so if there's anything that I can do to help you, even connect you with preachers in the state of Virginia, because I know preachers all over the world.
Absolutely,
So,
that's exactly what I need.
I will connect you with some preachers I know, some profound preachers, some unfound preachers, some unknown preachers, and some preachers that ain't preachers that want to be preachers. I can get you to them too. But I want to tell you that this move that you're making, it's imperative to remember that it's about being a family. And this is a quote that I have on my wall, and I always read every day. It says, "Our family is a circle of strength, founded on faith, joined by love, kept by God." That's how we do things as a family. Because there's no, in the God's eyesight, there's no white, there's no black, there's no purple, there's no green. They're people, and we're spiritual beings, and we have to connect spiritually. So you have our support as a family, and you have, I believe you have, these people wouldn't be on the line if you didn't have their support. So we have to work together, every last one of us, where we could reach, teach, and preach the truth, because that's the gospel. That's what matters.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thanks to everyone. And Natasha, may God continue to give you the strength and the courage and the compassion to do this work.
I want you all to know that the rabbi, Mr. Charles Feinberg, that's my boss.
Oh,
Hey,
you're
boss.
the boy. Okay.
And I think my mentor, Miss Kimberly Jenkins Snodgrass, is on here as well.
She is.
We are all a part of Interfaith Action for Human Rights. And I'm just grateful for them. Like, I came here, I'll tell you the truth, I came here for a whole different reason. And that reason didn't even work out. Ain't that something? But guess what? God used somebody else to make me move, and now I'm making moves. Thank you all, and I will invite you to every other event that we have. And I love you guys for your support, all of you. Miss Lily, call me. My eyes are blurry from crying. I can't read what's in the chat. Bye, everyone.
Okay.